Today's sermon is titled Killing for God, presented by Stephen Schwalbe. Okay, yes, Steve is my younger brother. While I was born a lovable, normal, well-adjusted person, Steve was inflicted with this hyper-competitive gene. Being less than a year younger, he strived to beat me in anything sports, and he was able to take many of the same classes in high school I had taken the year before, either getting an A or a higher version of an A. I signed up for Air Force ROTC at UCLA. Steve goes and gets accepted to the U.S. Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. To his credit, he earned a bachelor's degree from the Air Force Academy, a master's degree from Golden Gate University, and a PhD from Auburn University, all in political science. He served over 30 years in the Air Force, primarily as an intelligence officer. He retired as a colonel in 2007. Until recently, he taught online at the American Public University, serving as the chair of the Political Science and Public Administration Department. Now he's an adjunct professor at Columbia College and a full-time author. He resides with Ingrid, his lovely wife of over 30 years, in Oak Harbor, Washington, and has one daughter, Sophia, who is currently a first lieutenant in the Air Force. It is my honor to introduce my little brother, the esteemed Stephen Schwalbe. Steve.
Well, thank you so much. Can you hear me?
No.
Yeah.
What? Yes?
Yes,
You
sir.
can? Okay, thank you, Susan. Thank you, Randy, for inviting me and having me, giving me the opportunity to talk about my latest book. And thank you, Mary, for helping me as well with the music. And my brother helped me with the slides. So very much appreciated. And I'm very, very much looking forward to talking to you today. So thanks for having me. So let me get started with, I'm agnostic, so I have no bias, no dog in this fight. I come to this as a political scientist. I am not religious per se. So at the end of my career, I'm teaching at the Air War College. I'm a professor, and I realize we have a very big problem. There's no elective for religion and conflict for the students to take. And given 9/11 and all the conflicts that we were in at that time, I thought it was critical to have that. So I put together a proposal to be approved, and I needed a textbook. So I went to the libraries, I went online, I looked everywhere for a textbook and could not find one. They were all about a single religion at a particular time or a religion in a particular place, region of the planet. But just to talk about religion and conflict, I could not find one. So I had identified a gap in the literature, which is really hard to do. And so it's like very exciting. But I was teaching online. There was no time, so I stopped teaching a couple years ago. I spent a year researching and writing, found a publisher, and that was supposed to be published in February. Coronavirus delayed it till July 15th. So it's a relatively new book. And today, I'll be talking about chapter 1. There's an introduction in 4 chapters, and it's an analysis of conflict of the Abrahamic religions. So what we're talking about is Judaism, Christianity, and Islam in that order. We'll be talking about it in that order throughout the presentation. As Randy indicated, we're focusing on the third principle, spiritual growth. Growth meaning a greater understanding and appreciation of this topic for today. So if you were to Google concepts of religious conflict, looking for concepts, you would not find anything. The only thing that comes up is definitions and editorials and essays and research on religious conflict, but not concepts. So I had to create concepts that facilitated conflict as a result of religion. And here are the 5 I came up with. We'll address each in order, starting with a definition and then going through the religions. So let's get underway. Fundamentalism. So fundamentalism is basically a reaction to change. But some people, not the majority, but some people in every society are resistant to change. You change, they have a routine, they like what they're doing, they're very comfortable, and you try to change it, and they're going to say, I don't, no, I'm not interested. And sometimes this gets to be very big. And so you usually championed by a white male who will interpret selected parts of the scriptures or the holy text to legitimize what he is saying. And all of a sudden you have a movement, and usually trying to get back to the golden age. So that's the definition. Belief in the absolute authority of sacred scripture. Starting with Judaism, we have three sects in Judaism. There's the Reformists, there's the conservative group, and then there's the Orthodox Judaism. There's like 4 million Orthodox Jews in the world, of which 2 million are Haredim. The Haredim follow halakha and Jewish traditions very strictly. And so they're exempt from military service, etc. More is Gush Emunim, which is was a right-wing activist group that was trying to get Jewish settlements on the Golan Heights, West Bank, and Gaza Strip. They no longer exist. And then the Koch political party was founded by Rabbi Meir Kahane, and he's your white male, you know, that we were talking about. And when he died, the party went away. And then we have the Shas political party representing the Sephardic Haredim in the Knesset, and they align, of course, with the Likud party on the conservative side, and the Likud party led by Netanyahu. Okay, let's turn to Christianity. Evangelicals and Catholics are, by definition, fundamentalists. They all follow the Pope. The Pope, you know, side note, you know, it had the senior bishop Peter, brother of Jesus, became the Pope after Jesus died, representing Jesus on earth. And as such, whatever the Pope says, that's it. So we're not talking fundamentalism regarding Catholics, but we are talking about fundamentalism regarding Protestants. A Baptist editor named Curtis Lee in 1920 wrote this book on the right, Fundamentals, from which the terms fundamentalism and fundamentalist derive from. And in fact, in 1919, there was a Fundamentals Association meeting in Minneapolis, Minnesota, who promoted the following platforms, as you can see there. Turning to Islam, fundamentalists believe only in the Quran. The Quran was recited to Prophet Muhammad, who could not read, so that was your miracle, by Archangel Gabriel, who relayed it directly from Allah. So this is the word of Allah in the Quran. And then the hadiths are the things that Prophet Muhammad said and did while he was alive, and his followers wrote them down, and 100 years later, they're collated into this book called the Hadiths. Unfortunately, a lot of them contradicted the Quran and each other. So it's evolved to now, today, there are 4 schools of law based on your interpretation, their interpretation of Hadiths. Muslim fundamentalists, of course, reject Western modernization. The first fundamentalist group was the Muslim Brotherhood. It was founded in Egypt in the 1920s and recently was legalized. And so the leader of the Muslim Brotherhood was Mohammed Morsi, and he ran for president and was elected. But Morsi was president for less than a year before General El-Sisi led a coup d'etat and put him in prison, where he died for lack of medical attention. And finally, the note that on Islamic fundamentalism is Wahhabism. So tribal chief Saud and Imam Wahhab got together and created the country Saudi Arabia, where Saud would be the king and run the country, and Wahhab would be responsible for the religion, which was very fundamentalist, very conservative. And this is the religion not only of Saudi Arabia, but of Osama bin Laden. Okay, Next topic, proselytizing religion. Usually this happens when a group is conquering and they're passing on their religion, and it's done by force most of the time. Starting with Judaism, you know, back in the Roman Empire, the Jewish zealots were the terrorists of today, and they were devastating. And so there was not a lot of motivation to have the Jewish faith grow at that time. So for the first 1,000 years, there was a lot of laws passed to prevent Judaism from growing. Starting with Jews were outlawed from proselytizing around 200 in the empire. Christians were banned from converting. Muhammad declared death to any Jew who tried to convert a Muslim. And the Caliph forbade Jews from proselytizing. And on top of all that, how difficult is it to become Jewish? You have to get the a blessing by a rabbi. It takes at least 3 requests. Then after some training, you have to pass an oral exam from a panel of rabbis, and then of course you have to be circumcised. So it's not easy, and yet they still exist, top 10 religion in the world by population. Turning to Christianity, Jesus preached to the Gentiles, but he wanted to convince them that he was the Messiah, but he wasn't preaching Christianity because it didn't exist. Paul was the one that created Christianity based on Jesus, and he preached around Asia Minor and Europe, and eventually ended up in Rome, where he was put to death. As I indicated, once the Pope and Christianity merged with the Holy Roman Empire, you had the Pope paying for crusades, starting with converting the Holy Lands in the Middle East from Muslim to Christianity. The total number of people killed over the crusades, which lasted hundreds of years, was over 1 million. And then finally, we have Christianity being spread around the world. Not today, but just prior to today was the imperial powers of Europe with the colonization, and as they took over states and countries and areas where people were quote unquote uncivilized, they would civilize them with Christianity. And then trade. And then of course we have today the Mormons in the South Pacific. One of their missions is to pass along Mormonism, which is one of the parts of Christianity. Proselytizing Islam. Well, you have to begin with the Arab culture. It's always been violent. Raids, pillages, raping, that's a violent culture. And so once Islam became the religion of the Arab world, it was spread quickly by sword. And it should be noted that even the Prophet Muhammad was a military man, as it turns out. He led 27 campaigns, fought in 9, and was seriously wounded in 1 campaign. So in less than 1,000 years after he died in 623, Islam had been spread from the Himalayas in India to the Atlantic Ocean in Spain. It's the quickest and biggest expansion of an empire at that time, up until that time. Okay, so turning to the next topic is concept, sacrifice. Sacrifice, the scholars came up and some of them concluded that sacrifice was needed for humans to survive their killing tendencies and to keep population growth in check to allow for progress. And most important, suicide is forbidden in all religions, and yet we still have it. Starting with Judaism. Human sacrifice is common in the Old Testament, especially child sacrifices. And a perfect example is in Genesis with God asking Abraham to sacrifice his only son, Isaac. And as he's on the hill about to knife him, Archangel Gabriel says, no, don't do that. We were just testing your faith. And so in the end, they sacrificed a goat. The most famous suicide was Masada, where the Sicarii Jews took over this outpost and held it until a Roman army finally showed up. And as the gates were being breached, all 967 men, women, and children killed themselves rather than be captured, being taken by the Romans, which of course ended up with crucifixions, etc. And talking about crucifixions, Paul characterized the crucifixion of Jesus as salvation of mankind and dying for man's sins. What's interesting here is the fact that Jesus, one, looks like a Southern European and not a Palestinian Jew. And two, he's being crucified using rope, which is much more common than spikes. I saw a movie just a couple days ago on television about young Jesus, so obviously hypothetical. And as the big family is moving back to Nazareth from Egypt, they pass a road of at least 10 crucifixions, all of which used rope. None had spikes. The next thing on this chart is the thought that most people believe that Christians were crucified, were slaughtered during the Roman Empire as in Colosseums with the lions or with gladiators. And there was research was done and the records were reviewed, and actually it turned out very few Christians were actually killed like that. It was a myth perpetrated by the church for instruction and or encouragement. Turning to Islam, you can kill yourself, and as long as you do that on behalf of Allah, then it is martyrdom, in which case you become famous. You're talked about. You're given direct ascension to heaven, where you have unlimited sex, and your family gets a one-time compensation back on earth. You'll see here that the Muslims are knifing a cow. And there's a reason for that, because Muslims and Hindus have not gotten along for thousands of years. And the cow is a sacred animal in Hinduism. You also notice that Muslims, if they veer from the Islamic faith, can be killed. It's called takfirism. And finally, when it comes to renouncing faith, Christians will tend to kill themselves or be killed more than Muslims as a result of some studies. And the next concept is revenge, and I also include genocide. Revenge is something that was expected in societies. If you're attacked, and it's expected that you'll counter the attack, and it was common amongst all three of the Abrahamic religions. And the problem is that revenge then can perpetuate over generations, and that's a problem. That's a problem. Extreme revenge, total retaliation, is called genocide, and it's defined by the United Nations as the intent by government to destroy a national, ethnic, or racial or religious group. So, beginning with Judaism, an eye for an eye is referred to as the rule of talion. It's common in the Bible. The rule of talion also existed. Actually, it's sourced back to Babylon and was part of Roman law as well. However, Genesis didn't limit the revenge, an eye for an eye. Okay, so Genesis said, well, it could be a couple people, maybe a dozen people for an eye. So the classic example is in the New Testament with the first Jewish revolt in 66, where the Jewish zealots reacted to the governor rampaging the temple for money and raising taxes, and they took over Jerusalem. And then the Syrian army came to take it back and was defeated. And so the Romans sent one of their premier armies to take Jerusalem back, and they did. They burned Jerusalem, they burned the temple, and they killed over 500,000 Jews. Way overkill, but the intent was to serve as a deterrent from any future uprising or rebellions. And as far as the Hebrew Bible, the Lord was very jealous and killed those who changed their beliefs from him to something like a golden calf. When Moses went into the hills, the mountains, for 40 days, 40 nights, 40 meaning a long time. No one's actually counting the days and nights. He comes back with the 10 Commandments, and the Jews are now worshiping a golden calf that they fabricated. And that resulted in almost 42,000 Jews being killed by the Lord. As far as genocide, in the Hebrew Bible, Joshua was directed to slaughter 31, actually remove the Canaanites from Judea, because now Judea belongs to the Jews. And in that, Deuteronomy offers a term harem and defines it as total destruction, so that no one would be inspired to plunder, and then the captives then couldn't spread rumors into those that won into their ears and causing seeds of doubt. And one example here, another example would be God declaring that the Amalekites be exterminated, in this verbatim from Exodus and Samuel. And turning to Christianity, Jesus, of course, believed in love, did not believe in the rule of Talion. However, when it came to real world, we have the Pope and the Holy Roman Empire, and as I mentioned, moving down to the Holy Land, there was a lot of revenge killings on Muslims, and Jews were killed outright because they facilitated the crucifixion of Christ. As for genocide, the example is, two examples. One is the Ottomans. This is still current. The Ottomans, now the Turks, decided or learned through their spies that the Christians in Armenia, which is Central Asia, were helping the Russians in World War I. And so they decided they had to solve that problem, and they killed 900,000 plus or minus 100,000 Armenians. And this is still an issue today between Armenia, the country, and Turkey. And of course, everybody's familiar with the Holocaust and Hitler's final solution in Europe with 6 million Jews. Turning to Islam, the name for that they in Arabic for the rule of Talion is Qisus. Applies only to Muslims. And Muhammad, although I indicated he was a warrior of sorts, he was also a master negotiator, and he did not like revenge killings, and he preferred to solve that with negotiations. As far as genocide, the example I found was there's a whole society of Muslims living in Sicily on the map that'd be on the bottom. King Frederick moved them to Lucera, and then subsequent to Frederick, Charles then destroyed Lucera, killing at least 20,000 of them with the intent to kill them all. And finally, the last concept is terrorism. There is no worldwide definition of terrorism. One man's garbage is another man's treasure. In this case, a terrorist may be the freedom fighter in somebody else's eyes. So there's no agreement. That doesn't mean the United States didn't come up with a definition. Terrorism is a premeditated, politically motivated violence perpetrated against targets. So the problem is violence. You know, if it's a violent crime, that's for personal gain versus a terrorist attack, which is intended to sow doubt within a population about the government. Terrorist attacks are performance events. 9/11 was a performance event to bring down the confidence of the United States and the Western world. There are 3 types of terrorist attacks that scholars came up with: demonstration, destructive, and suicide. You can have a combination of all of these. Obviously, 9/11 was. The suicide by itself is the most destructive of the 3. there was a correlation, a study, lots of studies were made, and a correlation was made between terrorism and, and terrorism and religion. And it turned out to be a high correlation. No surprise. So a suicide attack is more likely when a nation is occupied. So take our 243 Marines in Lebanon, foreign powers of democracy, that'd be the United States, different religion, Lebanon, Muslim, and we're Christian. And what do you have? A suicide attack, and all of the Marines were killed. 1983. So let's start with Judaism. Case could be made that the Lord in the Hebrew Bible was a terrorist. Each of the plagues inflicted on Egypt to convince the Pharaoh to release the Jews, the freed Jews, started with the Nile turning red, killing of all the fish, and then frogs swarmed, and then bugs crawled, hordes of animals, pestilence. Okay, pestilence definition, just in case you're not sure. Example, hordes of mosquitoes carrying the bubonic plague, boils on all the people, including the Pharaoh, hail, enough to keep people inside, killing the animals, locusts, swarms of locusts, eating the rest of whatever was left on the fields, darkness for perhaps a week, couldn't see anything. And then finally, when all that didn't work, all the firstborn babies, to include animals, were killed. And then after the Jews were freed and they crossed the Red Sea, the Lord sent the Egyptian army because he realized that society could not operate without the manpower the Jews provided. And then the Egyptian army was drowned when the tides returned. The Lord, as I mentioned, directed Joshua to remove the Canaanites, and he also sent pestilence and terror against the Canaanites as well. And then the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah because of the immoral activities that were ongoing. And this is a picture of Gomorrah being smited by God. And then, of course, the flood of the known world with Noah, where only Noah's family and the animals on the ark survived, everybody else drowned. Bringing it a little closer today, we have the Jewish underground as a result of the peace treaty between Egypt and Israel. And then their intent was to blow up the Dome of the Rock, which is pictured there. And in order to do a terrorist attack, you need the approval of a rabbi, an imam, or a priest. They went to the rabbi, and the rabbi went to the authorities. As far as Christianity, in the Revelation, God sent locusts to torture people for months. A little closer to today, the Ku Klux Klan started as a result of the Civil War. It was a reaction to the civil rights, the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. They disappeared, came back in the 1920s, disappeared, came back in the 1950s as a result of the civil rights movement, especially in the 1960s, and they're still with us today. And Phineas was a priest in Exodus, and the Lord was putting a pestilence on them because of the Jews were getting too sexually active with the Mennonites. And so Phineas speared one of the Jews in bed with a Mennonite woman and killing them both, and the pestilence ceased. So we had this terrorist activity in the 1990s. They were all caught and put in prison. And finally, Islam. Sunnis and Shia don't get along. Sunnis believe that the caliph, the leader of the Muslim world, would be selected by the ulema, which is the tribal leaders, and the Shia believed it was done by blood. And so the Prophet did not have a son, so the first caliph was a cousin, then it was an uncle. In any case, the Kharijites disagreed with both of them and eventually were defeated by the Sunnis in a major battle, and so they became a splintered group. The Kharijites are pictured on the right supporting Islamic State, and the growth of terrorism has started in the 1980s and has continued until today. So the bottom line is, regarding terrorism, is prevalent within Judaism early on, but then it waned and it flourished in Christianity, and then of course now it's with Islam. And that concludes my presentation. End of chapter 1. Thank you for your attention.